There are moments in life when the weight of the battle feels so heavy that you start to wonder if you have the strength to keep swinging. The blows of life come one after another, disappointments stack on top of frustrations, and storms roll in before you've even had time to catch your breath from the last one. But let me remind you today, you were never created to fight every battle in your own strength. You were never designed to carry every burden with your own hands. There is a God who steps into the ring when you're too weary to fight. There is a God who takes the front line when the enemy raises his head. He doesn't just stand beside you, he goes before you. He doesn't just watch your struggle, he declares, "This battle is mine, not yours." The problem is that too many of us are fighting battles that God never assigned to us. We wrestle with what people think. We wrestle with situations we can't control. We wrestle with the shadows of our past, and the more we wrestle, the weaker we become. But God says, be still, stop swinging at the wind, stop exhausting yourself in fights that cannot be won by human effort. The Lord says, if you trust me fully, I will fight for you. That means trust Him with the timing, trust Him with the process, trust Him with the outcome, trust Him when it looks like you're losing. Trust Him when your back is against the wall. Trust Him when the voices of doubt get louder than your own prayers. Because your victory does not depend on the size of your strength but on the greatness of His power. You see, when the children of Israel stood before the Red Sea with Pharaoh's army behind them, they had no weapons to fight, no boats to cross, and no escape in sight. But God stepped in and parted the waters. When Joshua marched around the walls of Jericho, they didn't have battering rams or siege equipment. They had only a shout of faith, and God tore the walls down Himself. When Daniel was in the lion's den, he had no sword, no shield, no way out. But God sent His angel to shut the lions' mouths. Over and over, Scripture shows us that when we trust Him fully, He steps into the impossible, and what we could never do on our own, He accomplishes with a word. So why is it so hard for us to let go and let God fight? Because trust requires surrender, and surrender feels like weakness. We want to stay in control. We want to dictate the plan. We want to see the evidence before we believe, but faith does not work like that. Faith says, I don't see the way, but I know the one who is the way. Faith says, I don't understand the process, but I believe in the one who holds the process. Faith says, even if I don't know what's coming next, I trust that He's already gone ahead of me to prepare the ground. When you fully trust God, peace will replace panic. Worship will silence worry. Praise will rise up even in the midnight hour because you know that the outcome is already secured. You don't have to live like a victim of circumstances when you are a child of the Most High. You don't have to crumble under the pressure when you know your Father owns the battlefield. Every weapon formed against you may rise, but it will not prosper, because the battle belongs to Him. And here is the truth. The enemy does not fear you, but he fears the God within you. He trembles when you stop striving and start trusting. He panics when you lift your hands in surrender and say, God, this belongs to you. Because the moment you stop fighting in your flesh and start standing in your faith, heaven begins to move. Armies of angels are released, doors swing open, chains break loose, miracles are set in motion. So stand still, lift up your head, stop rehearsing the size of the problem, and start magnifying the power of your God. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. If He fought for them, He will fight for you. If He made a way then, He will make a way now. Trust Him fully, and watch Him turn your battlefield into a testimony of His glory. There are moments when the weight of life presses so hard against your chest that it feels like you can hardly breathe. You pray, and it seems like the heavens are silent. You fight with all your might, but the more you fight, the more you feel yourself slipping. It is in those very moments that you must realize you were never meant to fight every battle on your own. Some struggles are bigger than your strength. Some mountains are higher than your ability to climb. Some valleys are darker than your eyes can see through. That is why you have a God who declares that the battle belongs to Him. He does not call you to figure it all out. He calls you to trust him. He does not demand that you carry the entire weight. He asks that you rest in his promise that he will carry it for you. The hardest part of trusting God fully is that it requires you to let go of control, and letting go of control feels risky. We cling to plans, to timelines, to solutions that make sense in our limited understanding. But when God says, "The battle is mine," he is also saying, "Release your grip. Stop trying to manipulate the outcome. Stop exhausting yourself in a fight that is already settled." That is where faith steps in. Faith says, "I cannot see how this will end, but I know who holds the ending." Faith says, "I don't know when relief will come, but I know who my deliverer is." Faith shifts the weight off your shoulders and places it onto the one who cannot fail. When you look back through the scriptures, you see a consistent pattern. God specializes in stepping into impossible situations when his people trust him fully. The Israelites had no weapons to defeat Pharaoh's army, but God parted the sea. Jehoshaphat's army was outnumbered, but when they praised, God caused confusion in the enemy's camp. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were thrown into the fire, but the fire could not burn them because God himself stood with them. These stories are not just distant tales from the past. They are testimonies that the same God still fights today. He has not lost his strength. He has not diminished in power. He has not grown weary or weak. He is still mighty in battle, and when you step aside and let him fight, victory becomes inevitable. Yet the enemy knows how to distract you. He will whisper doubts into your ear. He will magnify the size of the problem to make you forget the size of your God. He will try to convince you that if you don't act, if you don't fix it, if you don't intervene, everything will fall apart. But that is a lie designed to pull you out of faith and into fear. Fear makes you grasp for control, but faith causes you to release it. Fear makes you shrink back, but faith makes you stand still. Fear causes you to panic, but faith teaches you to praise. When you trust God fully, you silence the lies of the enemy and position yourself to see miracles unfold before your eyes. There is a battle raging over your destiny, over your peace, over your joy, and over your future. The battle is not just what you see with your natural eyes, but what happens in the unseen realm. You may think your fight is against a person, a system, or a circumstance, but the truth is, much of what you wrestle with is beyond human strength and human solutions. That is why God reminds you that he fights for you. He steps into wars you cannot even see. He blocks dangers that never make it to your doorstep. He cancels assignments of the enemy before they ever take shape. When you understand this, you no longer live in fear of what comes against you, because you recognize that the God who goes before you has already secured the outcome. Trusting him fully means that you do not just believe in him on the surface, but you anchor your whole life in his promise. Trust is not passive, it is active. Trust means you wake up in the morning and declare that no matter what happens today, you are not shaken because the battle is not yours. Trust means you make decisions not based on fear of failure, but on faith in his provision. Trust means that when your mind screams with worry and your heart races with anxiety, you choose to silence the storm within by remembering who holds your tomorrow. Trust demands a surrender that is not halfway, not conditional, but complete. Partial trust still leaves you carrying part of the load, but full trust lays it all down before him. The children of Israel had to learn this in the wilderness. When Pharaoh's army came rushing behind them, and the Red Sea stood before them, they had no way out. Their logic told them it was over, their fear told them they would die, but God said, "Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord." They had to trust him enough to move forward when he opened a way they never expected. You see, trust requires movement even when the ground beneath you does not yet look solid. Trust requires stepping when you cannot see the bridge, believing that he will hold you up. Trust is not waiting for proof before you act. It is acting because you know God is proof enough. Sometimes the reason we do not see victory is because we keep stepping in front of God to fight battles that were never ours to begin with. We swing at enemies that only God can conquer. We try to force open doors that only God can unlock. We attempt to heal wounds that only God's presence can restore. Every time we do, we wear ourselves down and lose strength. But the moment we choose to step back and lift our hands in surrender, heaven begins to move. Angels are dispatched, strategies shift, and battles turn in your favor not because you fought harder, but because you trusted deeper. The enemy trembles at a believer who has learned to fully trust. He cannot manipulate someone who has made up their mind that God has the final say. He cannot intimidate someone who has decided that fear will not control them. He cannot discourage someone who has chosen worship over worry. Trust is a weapon. Trust disarms the lies of the enemy. Trust tears down strongholds in the mind. Trust positions you under the covering of God's protection. And when you live with that kind of trust, you discover that battles begin to lose their power over you because you recognize they were never truly yours. When David stood before Goliath, the giant mocked him, belittled him, and tried to intimidate him. But David declared that the battle was the Lord's. He was not relying on the sling in his hand, but on the God who directed it. That is the kind of trust that shifts atmospheres, that breaks intimidation, and that brings supernatural victory. That same God who fought for David stands ready to fight for you, but you must be willing to put your full confidence in him. You cannot hold on to both fear and faith. You must release one to embrace the other. And when you choose faith, when you choose trust, you place yourself in the hands of the Almighty who has never lost a battle. There comes a point in every believer's life when the weight of the fight becomes overwhelming. You pray, you fast, you strategize, you do everything you know how to do, and yet the battle seems unshaken. That is because some battles were never meant to be won by human hands. Some struggles are designed so that only God's intervention can bring the victory. The mistake many of us make is that we spend so much time swinging our fists in the natural that we miss what God is doing in the supernatural. We exhaust ourselves trying to fix what only His power can fix. We cry over doors that shut when He has already promised to open better ones. And we wonder why peace feels distant, joy feels fleeting, and strength feels like it is slipping through our fingers. The truth is simple, the battle is His, but the trust must be yours. When you choose to trust Him fully, you shift your posture. You no longer stand like someone cornered, frantic, and afraid, but like someone who knows their defender is mighty. Trust changes your voice. It changes the way you talk about the problem. Instead of magnifying the size of the storm, you magnify the size of your God. Instead of rehearsing the pain of the past, you start declaring the promise of the future. Trust shifts your focus from what is against you to who is for you. And when you live like that, even in the middle of the fight, peace becomes your portion. Think about Jehoshaphat when he was surrounded by armies far greater than his own. Logic said he was finished. Numbers said there was no way out. But God gave him an instruction that made no sense in the natural. Put the singers at the front. Lead with worship, not with weapons. And as they lifted their voices, God confused the enemy and gave them victory without them even raising a sword. That is what happens when you trust Him fully. You trade your weapons of worry for the power of worship, and God fights in ways you never could. The problem with many of us is that we trust God partially. We give Him some battles but hold on to others. We trust Him with our Sundays but not our Mondays. We trust Him with our eternity but not our present situation. Partial trust still leaves you vulnerable, still leaves you burdened, still leaves you anxious. Full trust is the only way to truly live in freedom. Full trust says, God, I don't just believe you can fight, I believe you will. Full trust says, I don't just sing about your power, I lean on it with all my weight. Full trust says, even if I don't see how you're working, I know you're already moving on my behalf. Consider Daniel in the lion's den. He had no ability to defend himself against the beasts that surrounded him, yet he trusted God so fully that even when thrown into the darkness, his faith did not waver, and God sent his angel to shut the mouths of the lions. Or think of Paul and Silas in prison. Chained and beaten, they chose to sing hymns in the midnight hour, and as they lifted up their praise, the foundations shook, the doors opened, and freedom came rushing in. Over and over again, the evidence is clear. Trust is not just an idea, it is a weapon. When you trust him fully, you release heaven's power into your earthly battle. The enemy knows this, which is why he fights so hard to steal your trust. He sends distractions to shift your focus. He sends delays to make you doubt. He sends disappointments to break your confidence. But what he doesn't realize is that every time he pushes, he only gives you another reason to lean harder into God. Every setback becomes another opportunity to declare that your faith is not fragile, your trust is not negotiable, and your confidence is not up for grabs. Trust becomes your shield, your covering, your strategy, and your strength. When you understand that God fights your battles, you stop striving to prove yourself and start resting in his promises. You no longer waste time trying to figure out outcomes because you know the outcome is already in his hands. You no longer walk in fear of the unknown because you know he has already gone before you. You no longer tremble at the threats of the enemy because you know the victory was secured before the fight even began.